Sveiki konferencijos dalyviai ir vėliau žiūrintis įrašus iš konferencijos. Tai esu Jolanta Lipkevičienė, nevalstybinės mokyklos Žalioji gamtos mokykla vadovė. Mokykla veikia Kauno rajone. Siekiame tų pačių švietimo tikslų, kitokiais, inovatyviais būdais, metodais. Ir noriu pristatyti, kaip atradome Rodrigo Queiroz E Melo, kuris neužilgo skaitys pranešimą. Rodrigo yra nevalstybinių mokyklų Portugalijoje prezidentas, tai yra išsilavinęs mokslo vyras, aukštos kultūros, kiek teko pažinti, tai tiesiog esat sužavėti. Paprastas, malonus ir kultūringas. Ir jam rūpi, kaip sekasi vystytis savitoms mažoms bendruomeninėms nepelno siekiančioms mokykloms. Ir jis pasiruošęs su savo komanda konsultuoti, padėti, tarpininkauti pokalbiuose ir su įstatymų leidėjais. Ir kaip mes atradome Rodrigo, tai prieš metus Portugalija Sofija Reis kreipėsi mūsų mokyklą su prašymu duoti interviu jos moksliniam darbui, gynėsi disertaciją Jungtinėse Amerikos valstijose Montanos universitete. Ir jai rūpėjo, kaip sekasi vystytis pilietinėm iniciatyvom švietime posovietinėse šalyse. Gavome nemažai klausimų, kaip atėjo tokios idėjos kurti, su kokiais sunkumais susidūrėm, kas padėjo įsikurti, kaip telkėm komandą, kaip atradome šeimas, kurios nori leisti į Savito ugdymo mokyklą ir kaip sekasi ugdyti tuos vaikus, kurie ateina iš įprastų mokymosi mokyklų. Ir daugelį dar kitų klausimų gavome iš Sofijos Reis. Ir užsimezgė šiltas bičiuliškas ryšys ir dar vis susirašinėjome ir vieną dieną gauname laišką, kad gal norite susipažinti su nevalstybinių mokyklų prezidentu Rodrigo, kuris galėtų jums pakonsultuoti, padėti, paremti, patarpininkauti, dalinti savo patirtimi. Aišku, su džiugesiu mes priėmėm tą pasiūlymą ir pasibendravę su Rodrigu sutarėm, kad jisai paskaitys pranešimą šitoje konferencijoje. Beje, Rodrigo pasako, kad Seime vykusioje konferencijoje jis jau vieną kartą skaitė pranešimą, tai 2020 metais. Mes buvom kažkaip negirdėję apie tą konferenciją. Tai tikrai optimistiškai nuteikia, kaip kitose šalyse lyderiams rūpi ir tos šalys, kurios tik tai gal pilietinės iniciatyvas pradeda išreikšti, ir susiduria su begalė visokių nuostatų, sunkumų ir kartu įdomiai savo gyvenimą dėlioja. Tai siūlome paklausyti Rodrigo, ką jis siūlo, kad tikrai turi būti kitokie įstatyminiai sprendimai ir valstybinėm mokyklom didelėm, kurios ir centralizuotai dar veikia, apjungiančios tarpusavyje, ir mikromokyklom, kurios kaip maži daigeliai pradeda augti ir padeda atsinaujinti švietimo kūnui. Tai man gera girdėti, kad pasaulis sako, visiems turi užtekti vietos pasaulyje. Paklausykime Rodrigos.
Okay, so good morning. Thank you very much for having me. My name is Rodrigo Melo. I'm Portuguese, but I am chairman of the European Council of National Associations of Independent Schools. So we are an NGO based in Finland that represents 20 associations of non-governmental schools in 12 different European countries. Today, what I would like to share to you in 2 or 3 minutes, is what is European non-governmental education in Europe and what it means for the different national education systems. The first fact I would like to share, and that is very important, is that non-governmental schools represent 20 million students in Europe, so almost 20% of the school systems. Therefore, it's very important for all European states to take into consideration that non-governmental schools are not a very small sector that might exist or not. It's a big sector, and in some countries, it represents almost half of the students in the education systems. In most of the countries, there is some kind of support for parents who go to these schools. And one thing we see across Europe is that this independent sector or non-governmental school sector is really the sector that is leading innovation in education. I will leave you then these numbers just to show you that in a lot of countries, the independent sector or the non-governmental schools represent even the majority of students in different stages of life. Here, for instance, in the Netherlands or Belgium, more than half of students in primary education go to a non-governmental school with public funding. Even in lower secondary in the Netherlands, it's almost 80% of students, Belgium 60%, Malta and UK, again, almost half of the sector. And so the fact is that independent schools really represent a lot of students, and they should be cherished by state authorities. And this is for one simple reason. Independent education is all about pluralism and diversity. In most countries, different pedagogies, different curriculums, different approaches, all this is presented to parents by the non-governmental schools. In fact, this has even been recognized in the European Parliament. In 2018, with a vast majority, almost unanimously, the European Parliament passed a resolution where it made clear the importance of non-governmental schools to ensure that parents have the offering of different religious, philosophical, and pedagogical convictions. And this diversity makes up also the strength of Europe. The strength of our countries come not for us being all equal, but for us living together within our diversity. And this fact led the European Parliament to propose to the governments that they give adequate financial support for all categories and all levels of schools, including non-for-profit private schools. And this, in practice, means very different things in very different countries. In some countries, there is no funding at all for parents who want a different approach to schooling that they find in the private sector. So all parents that go to the non-governmental sector have to pay. In some countries, there is small amounts of funding. Some countries have very significant funding. Netherlands, Denmark, Finland, independent non-governmental schools receive almost the same in some countries, for instance, Denmark, but exactly the same in the Netherlands and Finland as governmental schools. And this is what I bring to you that I think is more important. It's that finding the right balance between autonomy of the non-governmental school sector and regulation from the state. We all believe that education, a fundamental value, and because of its importance for personal development, must be regulated by the state. There are a certain number of rules that we all have to comply. This does not mean that regulation for the non-governmental schools has to be equal to regulation for the governmental schools. And certainly this means that regulation may not end the autonomy of the non-governmental school sector. And this is why the scale, the balance of this scale is not an equal balance. It has to balance towards autonomy in pedagogy, choosing the headmasters and the leadership, and defining the ethos of each school. And so when we speak about curriculum, when we speak about funding, when we speak about teachers or even facilities, we have to take into consideration that the ideal regulations are not ideal when we think about the independent school sector. Of course, we would all like our schools to be very well built with air conditioning and all the conditions, but that is very expensive. We cannot say that I can only have a school if it becomes very expensive for the parents. And so, in a nutshell, what I would like to, in the 7 minutes I would give to share with you today and leave some thoughts for Lithuania, with the conversations I had with Jolanta, I think this might be the most important for your conversation today. Firstly, diversity and pluralism are important in education. No society will be rich, no society will be sustainable if it is homogeneous. This is good values in education. Secondly, regulation of independent schools must take into consideration that these schools are the expression of a basic human right, the freedom of education. So, non-governmental schools are not an ordinary business, like a shoe shop or a factory. Therefore, regulation has to take this into consideration. And so when we speak about health and safety issues or licensing requirements, of course they are very important, but they must not be so that would make it impossible for society and NGOs to create small schools or to create affordable schools. Third idea, it's very important that there are funding schemes to support families. Simple, transparent, and with the right incentives. But the existence of support for parents is what makes also the governmental schools, the non-governmental schools, inclusive. In a lot of countries where there is no support, Greece, for instance, there is a big social divide between the parents who are able to pay to have their kids in non-governmental schools and the parents that, because they are not able to pay, cannot make a choice. If we want diversity within schools, we must have funding schemes. Finally, these funding schemes may not bring too much regulation for non-governmental schools. Of course, a certain amount of the regulation is important and must be in place, but it always must leave space for the school's autonomy, for the school's ethos, and for us to continue on innovating and bringing new ideas and new values into education. In a nutshell, thank you very much. This was what I wanted to share with you today and say that as an European non-governmental school organization, we are completely willing and anxious to help you in any way you find it can be useful.